everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the OB Division's Off-Cycle Burnout and Work-Life Enrichment Conversation Series. We, Anna Connors, Amy Leonard, Bailey Bigelow, who couldn't be with us today, and I are extremely fortunate to be joined by Dr. Stu Ashford and Jane Dutton. Before I introduce each of our speakers and turn it over to them, I thought I'd provide just a brief overview of our session. We started this last year to have a place for academics in our fields to come together and talk about our burnout experiences while also learning from one another about the ways in which we personally manage those common feelings of stress, anxiety, and exhaustion. I think this is a great time in the semester to be doing this because I know I'm feeling those emotions very highly right now, right before the Thanksgiving break kicks in. But this year, we wanted to do something a little different and focus on the ways in which senior scholars in our field have created meaning and a really enriched life for themselves across both the work and the non-work domains. Our first of this three-part series involved Dr. Sherry Thatcher and Lisa Lambert, who talked about creating meaning through leadership in the field more broadly. And for this second part, we have Dr. Sue Ashford and Jane Dutton, who will be speaking about the ways in which they've crafted a career that is rich in personal meaning, both in terms of their scholarly contributions to the field, as well as the manners in which they have navigated through work and non-work life in a really purposeful and fulfilling way. And so with that, I am so excited to introduce our speakers for today. Dr. Sue Ashford holds the Michael and Susan Janadornova Professorship in Management and Organization at the Ross School of Business, the University of Michigan. Dr. Ashford's illustrious research contributions have been in the areas of leadership development and leadership effectiveness, middle management voice and issue stalling, job insecurity, and individual proactivity. She's currently researching how to thrive in the gig economy. Her research has been published in a variety of top-tier journals. There's so many, I cannot even begin to list them all, but she's also previously served as an associate editor for the Academy of Management Journal and was named a fellow of the Academy of Management in 2002. More recently, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award by the OB Division, and if you were there, it was such a fun ceremony to be part of and watch that little back and forth that they had. Moving on to Dr. Jane Dutton, she is the Robert L. Kahn Distinguished University Emerita Professor of Business Administration and Psychology at the University of Michigan. Dr. Dutton spearheaded research in positive organizational scholarship, exploring compassion and the difference it makes for individuals and organizations, and has also made scholarly contributions surrounding the power of positive relationships at work, job crafting, and positive identities. In 2002, she co-founded the Center for Positive Organizations at the Ross School of Business. Dr. Dutton's work, just like Dr. Ashford's work, has been published across several top-tier outlets, and she received the Distinguished Scholar Award from multiple divisions of the Academy of Management, as well as the Distinguished Scholarly Achievement Award from the Academy and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the OB Division. More recently, Dr. Dutton also received the OB Division's Mentorships Award. And so I hope and you see just how perfect both of these speakers are. Really fun fact, when I first reached out to Dr. Dutton and Dr. Ashford, I asked them individually, and I can't remember which one it was, but one of you replied saying, just so you know, we've been best friends forever since grad school. And I said, oh, we know. And that's why we really, really want this to happen, because so much of creating personal meaning is also the relationships that we get because of this field. And so with that, I'm so excited to turn it over to you. They'll have a conversation about their lives and their careers, after which we'll open it up to questions and we'll moderate those either through the chat or if you'd like to unmute and ask those questions again. So thank you so much again, and we're so excited to have you.
Thank you, Nisha. Yeah, that was wonderful introduction. And, Nitya gave us some starter questions, so we'll kind of throw those back and forth to each other. But I thought, Jane, we should start by telling them a little more about our origin story. And so why don't I start and you can fill in. So I met Jane and her husband, Lloyd Sandilands, at the fall party of the first year of my doctoral students, and they were glittering, charismatic second-year students, which seemed so far advanced beyond me. And we went through the next years of grad school together, really. We went through the highs and the lows for sure, with many happy memories and useful support. I went on to take a job at the Tuck School at Dartmouth College, and Jane was at NYU, And we literally started researching together because we wanted a way to stay in touch. Isn't that weird? Like Jane goes, why don't we do something together? And I said, well, okay, what do we do? And Jane was in the strategy area, which I knew nothing about. And she said, why don't we study how issues get on the strategic agenda? And I'm like, well, okay, we could do that. I don't know anything about that. But it sustained me through a lot. I went through my first years at Tuck totally stressed out, untenured assistant professor. I struggled with infertility during that time. I got pregnant 2 weeks after I was told I was going to get tenure. So maybe it was stress. I don't know. The jury's still out. Maybe it wasn't. Who knows? And then I got recruited to Michigan. It was not Jane's idea. It came from another faculty member in the area to recruit myself and my husband. And, it's been wonderful ever since. I mean, I've been here for a long time. Jane was here a little bit longer. And, she's the godmother of one of my children. We spend the holidays together, but also just having someone who is on your side. You can say the good, the bad, and the ugly too. And all of that has happened. And they're going to be there for you. It's been a total blessing. But we are very close friends. Yes. So Jane, over to you. What would you fill in?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd said to us when we were doctoral students that we would actually travel, we would travel together, I think we would say it's like it's very small probability. Anyway, I just want to say it's a thrill to be here. And I care a lot about the OB division. And I still am doing a lot of, I've been actually retired for semi-retired, I've learned to say, for 6 years. But I still do a lot of coaching. I have regular contact with especially junior women in our field and doctoral students. So I am a forever till I die cheerleader for people trying to work their way through this field. Because while it's been wonderful, and I can tell you looking back, it even feels more wonderful, it is really hard. That was my experiences. It was really hard. So it started the hard. I'll just say just a little bit about my journey. Like we were at NYU. I was a year ahead of Sue. My husband and I, we were in a cohort of 3. One guy dropped out, and Lance and I ended up getting married, which our faculty, this is in 1977. So this is really a long time ago. Our faculty didn't know what to do. Dual career couples were considered a real liability. And so Sue and then her husband, Jim, was the year behind. So we had a bigger set of doctoral students. The doctoral student cohort was really important. And I will say at the time, there wasn't a lot of strong mentoring from the faculty at Northwestern at that time. And so we ended up doing a lot of stuff together. I think it was actually really good. We were sort of put in the position of having to publish together when we were doctoral students without working with advisors or anything. And I think that sort of conditioned us to do that. Anyway, dual career situation, both in OB at that time, that meant it was really hard to find 2 jobs in the management organization behavior field. So my husband took a job at Columbia. I took a job at NYU, but the only way we could be doing that together was for me to take a strategy position. And I had never taken a strategy course. So I was thrown into teaching the core. It was the undergraduate core, it wasn't the MBA core in New York, like strategy and in the 70s. And it was actually totally terrifying, but also such a great learning experience. And I still consider myself, I have a hard time when people say, what are you? Because I really consider myself a hybrid between strategy, OT, and OB. So anyway, we were at NYU, which was, I was at NYU, which was a fantastic experience, because I'll talk about that later. But the commuting, Lance and I were both commuting 3 hours a day, an hour and a half in, an hour and a half out of New York. And my husband loved it. He was like, New York. I would be like, oh, New York. So it was me that sort of said, we have to leave, or I'm leaving our marriage. I can literally not do this anymore. And so we were really lucky to get recruited. We were actually recruited as a married couple to Michigan to build a bridge between psychology and the business school, which was a wonderful bridge until it was dissolved on the psychology side. And we were at NYU. I was at Michigan from that time on, but I was in joint between psychology and the business school, and so that's been my harbor. It's still my harbor. I really love the University of Michigan. So anyway, that's my journey.
Yeah, one place Jim and I interviewed for jobs, we went together and we were given schedules. Mine was pink, his was blue. It was easy to keep them straight. So Jane, when these guys look at our work, they see us as engaging in me search, which is we negotiate ourselves. And I'm not sure we see it that way, but can you sort of talk about how we got into that approach and what draws us, what draws you to it and challenges you see or benefits? And then I'll try to comment on the same.
Yeah, I've never heard that term, but I know I have been accused of studying stuff that has personal relevance. Is that kind of what you mean by me search? I mean, it's coming from my life. And I have to say, like the first 8 years of my career was not me search, I would say. I was studying, again, issue and strategic agenda building. That's what I was teaching in the strategy field, which is kind of like applying micro OB to the dynamics of how issues get legitimized by strategy makers. But after 7 or 8 years, I was successful in the sense of getting things published, but it just didn't have any meaning to me. And so I guess I turned to me search in part just to find stuff that spoke to me more. And the first time was so I'm commuting to New York in the 70s and 80s, again, an hour and a half each way. I was living in New Jersey. I had young children. I had young children since the time I was a doctoral student. So this whole working mom thing was also, part of the challenge. Anyway, I was commuting at a time that homelessness was such a pervasive issue in New York. And I literally would be stepping over bodies on my way from the World Trade Center, which you commuted into, to my offices, which were on Wall Street. And several of us young faculty were sort of doing with like just the human despair that was surrounding us was it was palpable. And so a project that turned into an AMJ best paper and a whole bunch of about keeping an eye on the mirror, the role of image and identity in organizations, arose from our study of how the the Port Authority dealt with the issue of homelessness. But it was very much connected to, our own personal experience of how do you go teach a course on strategy after you've, greeted in the morning women in the bathroom that were, getting up from sleeping on the bathroom floor. I mean, it was really that sort of in your face. And I could never go back after that. I could never go back to not. And I feel like my whole career has been an appealing back to just get more authentically connected to what matters to me and sort of screw what other people were telling me about, well, that's not a legitimate topic in strategy or OB or whatever. So for me, the major benefit has been all the way along. And again, most of my projects since that time, which was a project done with Janet Dukarich, have been me relevant. And I've learned to trust myself as just an instrument, that I've had, whatever gifts have been given in my life, it's to use it as a way to inform and inspire my research. And I think it's not only kept me in the field because it's been much more meaningful because it's me. I can explain at the time when my mom was alive, I could say what I was doing and she got it. She understood it. She saw it as important. And the major challenge is why my colleagues many times in my career doubted me my doctoral students never doubted me. My doctoral students were my major advocates, but there were many of my colleagues who said things. Well, I just posted this on the Women in OB division. I mean, the most insulting was that I was the hallmark when I started studying compassion, partly because we'd had trauma in our personal life with our daughter. I was called the Hallmark card lady. And there was just this sort of dissing of that's not serious. That's not OB. That I just had to say, I don't care. It's really important to me. Now it's easier to do that obviously as a more senior colleague, but it's the only thing that's kept me in the field, because I was just feeling like I was working really hard, but I didn't care. I was successful, but I didn't care. So, okay, Sue, over to you. What would you say about the me search?
Well, I do think there is an origin to this that we both share, that certainly made a difference in my life. And it was Barry Staw's micro OB course at Northwestern. And we read an article by Carl White called Amendments to Theorizing. And Carl basically argued that everything you see in an organization in a complex way, you can see in life in a much more simplified fashion. And if you pay attention to those things in life, you can get insights into the more complex things that you might find in organizations. So I agree with Jane that I do think I've done me search. But to me, the caveat is you always need to keep the focus on the workplace and organization. So for me, it's more like, Scott DeRue and I are working on a paper on leadership, claiming and granting to build the identity. Meanwhile, I'm in a leadership group in my community, and there was this incident where somebody wanted to lead and I wanted to lead, and there was this great tension. And I'm like, I wonder if that happens in work groups when someone steps up to lead. So it's using the things that happen, but I think we've actually gone way farther in this me search kind of thing, where we're putting the things that happen front and center, like Ali Gabriel's study of postpartum depression. I mean, Jane and I couldn't have imagined that anyone would study that, and that would be seen as credible. I got the same messages Jane got, but probably in even a more formal way. I remember when I got tenure at Dartmouth, the tenure decisions are made by everybody. So this very hard-nosed, bombastic guy from accounting stopped by and he said, Sue, congratulations. And, with your record, we ought to put you up for full immediately. We really need you at the table. And all that, that's really cool. And then he went on to say, imagine if she was freed up to turn her mind to really important topics. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't feel as good to hear. That he didn't think those topics were important. And I, like Jane, just kind of kept going on what I have an intuitive feel of what is an important topic. And really, it all came to fruition to me when I put it together in the book I published in 2021, a popular book. And so many people told me these things were so valuable to me in my work life, and I'm like, yeah, I knew it all the time, but, I didn't always get that message from others. So there is probably a message there about, if you want to find meaning in your work, you need to define it for yourself and then have faith to keep going along that line.
Yeah, Sue, can I just add that I am concerned listening to doctoral students today that they are thinking a lot more about, and I don't know if this is what your experience is, people listening to the call, that, it's like, you got to have a contribution to the literature, which we all have to make contributions to literature, but that seems to be trumping people's own sense of, well, I think this is important. And my job is to convince other people that it's important. So I think I don't know exactly what's happening. Maybe it's local and it's not, part of the field, but I see a lot more pressures to step away from your intuitive sort of belief and sensibility about, your life has prepared you to see a particular way and to understand a particular way. And if you deviate that from that, I think it's a risk. And so, yeah. So Sue, maybe we should move to the next, jump to like, what do we think about, how can the field be further encouraged to facilitate research on more meaningful topics?
I
So
love
guess,
talking about this one
yeah,
because I think we have a schema about meaningful topics. Meaningful topics are like world poverty, climate change, hunger, racism, and all of those are super important. But I don't think they're the only definition of meaningful topics. We had this faculty meeting. I think you were gone at this point, Jane, but we had a faculty meeting where we had the UN's SDG goals up around the room. And we were supposed to go around with Post-its and put a Post-it on how our research related to climate change, world poverty, etc. The rest of those goals. And I walked around and I had my little Post-its and I'm like, and then I sat down, they asked for comments and I said, I didn't know whether I should put my Post-it on none of those or I should put my Post-it on all of those, because I see my work as preparing people who will go out and work on those things. And that seems super meaningful and important. And so in many ways, someone like me, who's teaching people how to be leaders, who's trying to produce research that teaches people how to find and grow their own effectiveness, like that relates to all the goals. Those people can then tackle them with gusto, or it relates to none. On the surface, it's seen as relating to none. So I think you need to be careful about how you think about meaningfulness. That said, if you define meaningfulness the way that I do, you're going to watch your colleagues get tapped by Thinkers 50 and, coming to a UN summit. And you don't get invited to those things, because it's not really seen as the schema of meaningfulness. So that would be my first thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to take a slightly different tact, and that is sort of if we thought about designing doctoral programs or departments that could really foster the courage and tenacity that it just does to do work, whether it's quote unquote meaningful or not. I just want to celebrate the importance of micro communities. That's my word for just a group of people who care about a similar topic. If I think for myself about we created a Center for Positive Organizations, but it really grew from a group of people sort of saying, there's this whole approach to thinking about organizations that seems to be understudied, and how could we be braver together and more supportive together if we just more formally created a micro community. And if any of you are familiar with kind of that effort, within it, there's a whole bunch of other very vibrant micro communities, like the Positive Relationships at Work group, which has, I don't know, over 120 scholars in it. And again, at the time, in our field, when that was birthed and became a micro community to support people who are doing this perspective, the major approach to relationships at work was an instrumental exchange-based relationship, account of relationships, why they exist, why they're important, blah blah. And it didn't have really a developmental, health-oriented view of relationships. And so I've seen with the meaning of work community, the positive relationships where there's a compassion group. There's there's a whole bunch of groups that are like this. For me, those have been lifesavers in terms of keeping research meaningful, keeping a sort of an almost an accountability group about trying to hold nascent ideas, before they're prematurely discarded, but also helping to develop those ideas. So that would be, to me, the number one thing, is to try to create micro communities that support meaningful research that can transcend. They don't have to be in your department. I mean, I think in your world, all of you are way younger than me. It's made more possible by Zoom and other methods that don't mean you have to be physically co-located. So it might be easier, but that's been a lifesaver for me in supporting meaningful research. So, Sue, should we jump? Do you think we've covered enough of that
Much,
topic?
yeah. But
I
my
mean, I'm
advice, the
watching,
next question was advice for junior scholars, and the only thing I'd add is about studying topics relevant to their personal lives is I'd say go for it. I can't imagine deriving insights in other ways. They don't work for me. I don't read 6 articles and know what the 7th should be. I get ideas from my life. And if that's you, you should go for it. If it's not you, don't worry about it. But if it is you, but always keep a work emphasis. Like, how does this show up in the workplace, in groups of people trying to do work together? There's a pretty broad spectrum of the workplace. So where do you want to take us?
well, I wanted to stay with this idea about what advice we would give for studying topics that are, and while grounding it in a theoretical framework. And I would say the importance of integrating your teaching and research really early on, even if you're teaching the core, the core OB or core, like find a way to link your research into teaching and use your class as this beautiful community to help enrich your ideas. I mean, I've taken very bizarre topics and integrated them into the core, even into the strategy core, as a way. It's just a beautiful, almost like testing ground for the ideas. And so, we were taught again, way back, to keep kind of research and teaching central, separated. And I would say, boy, marry them as soon as you can. And if you're teaching an elective, think about that elective as a book. And and each of your sessions is a chapter, and start writing the book with your class. I wish I had done way more integration earlier, but I was taught, and I don't know, I just sort of found my way into a pretty differentiated life of my research here and my teaching here. And I would encourage that as a method for for increasing the meaningfulness of our work lives.
Good idea. So switching topics a little bit, Jane, I like this question for you. In what ways would you say your work life enriches your personal life? And then you could do vice versa, but try to answer the first one.
Well, my work life has totally enriched my personal life. I mean, for me, first of all, you should know, I never figured it out. I have 2 daughters. They were 5 years apart. As I said, the first one we had when we were graduate students. I have always been tortured by the working mother thing. I never figured it out. I kept trying different things. But the enrichment was in so many ways. It was actually a lot through my doctoral students. My relationship with my doctoral students has been by far one of the most important things I just loved my career because I loved my doctoral students. And my doctoral students, especially when we lived in Michigan, where our house is closer to the boundaries were very permeable between our work life and our family life. So students would be over for dinner, students played instruments in my daughter's wedding. There's just been this beautiful, I mean, I guess I would say it's been a highly permeable boundary between work and family. And of course, my husband's in the same field. So I've had him, this is another blessing. I've had him as just a wonderful partner through this whole time. So I guess I would say they're mutually enriching. They're really been intertwined. It was when we were in New York. It was actually certain ways easier. We lived in New Jersey, again, commuted to New York, because physically our lives, our work life and family life were separated, which meant I didn't work in the evenings. I did not work weekends. It was actually much easier to contain my work life than when I lived really close to work. And it was like the work kept like seeping into everything. And actually having children, when my children left the house, which now they're 40s and they're 40s, 30s, high 30s, it was actually much harder for me to put the boundaries around. So that's another question, I guess. But I would say it's been mutually enriching. Yeah, right. And I have models. That's another thing I just want to say. Denise Rousseau, I don't know how many of you know her. She's at Carnegie Mellon. She was a faculty member when we were doctoral students. She had a crib in her office. And right from the beginning, again, there weren't very many women as faculty, but right from the beginning, we saw women that were modeling, again, an integration between work and family right from the beginning. So I would not go to some place where it felt dangerous to talk about my family. I would have died. I would have left the field. It's just too high a cost in my life. Anyway, go ahead, Sue.
Oh, yeah. I'll say a little bit about the work-life enrichment thing, and then I'm looking at our time, Jane, and we're going to have to just sort of pick what points we really want to say, because we're not going to get through all these questions. I mean, a working Sue is a happy Sue. I mean, this career is a total blessing, a total blessing. I mean, we are so lucky. You'll be far luckier once you have tenure. I get that, but I had infertility. It was not a fun time. People were talking to me about, Sue, have you ever considered the toll on your soul of being a junior faculty member? So, I remember that. But, to have a lifetime career where you can just creatively follow whatever instincts you want and produce creative products and go in a variety of different directions is just a total blessing. So that's it. And I will say, on the downside, the working mom part, Jane and I anchored very different ends of that spectrum. I was not a tortured working mom. I just, I knew the kids were better off if I had a place to go. I think we torture ourselves with our fears, our anxieties about raising kids. I did one symposium in 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there. And my middle daughter came. I had 3. And she came to it, and she was sitting in the audience. And I said, we all say you can't have it all. But when you get to my age and you're looking back, well, like, oh yeah, I did. The only difference is you never feel like you're having it all as you're going through it. You're always short shrifting something. But, if you look at the end of it, the kids are all right. And it was so lucky to have Hannah in the audience, because we broke into small groups and she could tell the parents, like, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, we were okay. And, you could look at having sitters as horrible. We looked at it as totally enriching of their lives. They had all these college girls that, were wonderful and much more fun than I was. And, it made for, I don't know, I just didn't worry about it. And, it turned out okay. So Jane, what points?
Wait, Sue, I gotta say though, because I had we now anchored different, but like our daughter was almost killed by our nanny when she was 3. And that was a total, talk about a working parent's worst nightmare. That is the reason I ended up studying compassion, partly so I had a very different experience of these sitters. And this happened when we were in Michigan, when it happened in our backyard. This woman was living with us. So I say that because I was so trusting. I never would have expected anything like this. It was life-changing. And so for the parents out there, men and women, who also see the risks of it, not just the risk is real. And we were really lucky. Emily is 37 and she still has anxiety, but it's, you know, we didn't have the dramatic, horrible. And so again, we represent two ends of the pole, not only in terms of psychologically, how we sort of worked with this working mom thing, but also our lived experience was different in terms of, you know, the potential risk, you know, of putting your children. I mean, it could happen in your own care. So, well, not what happened to us, but so it's always a thing. But I just have to anchor it on. If I had heard that from somebody in our field, I think I would have been even more dogged than I was about leaving no stone unturned about who you put your child in the care of. So I had to say that, Sue. I just feel like that's a
Yeah, no worries.
story. If I'd heard, it was important.
Yeah. Okay, so other points you want to make, because we want to leave some time for questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about how you work with this boundary challenge sort of thing, and just say, because you talked about, I should be sure to mention this, that after my 4th year, I was going to commuting and doing all this, I was going to have a nervous breakdown, and I ended up taking a year off just at the year I was being evaluated for my first promotion. And I had all the senior faculty say, you can't take a year off, you know, and I'm thinking, I'm on a tenure track. I can't do that. No, I've never heard of anybody that stopped. I was lucky because I had a dual career, so I could take financially a year off. It was the best thing I ever did, because I was also having fertility problems, and I did get pregnant in that time off. But also just to be with my other daughter, our older daughter, for a year without the stress, it was a blessing. And then I have gone half-time several times during my career as a way to manage the load and the stress. And I don't think it's hurt my career at all. And again, I was lucky to be able to do it and to negotiate it, but you sort of just did it. I did it under Kathy Eisner. There's a whole bunch of women, I don't know about men so much, that have done this, that have restructured, you know, for a year or two, their contract. You know, usually it means adjustments to teaching, as a way to manage the stress. And I'm just here to say, I don't think it hurt my reputation. I don't think that most people know, but that was such a lifesaver in terms of different chapters of my struggle to love this career, which I totally do, and to love how I was having the other parts of my life.
Yeah, I think it's really great that you have done that, and I agree, hasn't hurt at all. I guess the one I would want to answer is, what aspects of our careers and this field do junior scholars often place undue pressure on themselves on? And you know, you guys have a bigger struggle than we did because there's so much more connectivity now. I mean, it's like you can actually get pinged by your wrist. I can't. I don't wear that. But you can get pinged by your wrist to pay attention to your work. You know, I do think that when you're off, be off and don't worry about it. You know, like, people are not thinking about you as much as you think they're thinking about you. They're thinking about themselves. And so, you know, I think creating those boundaries of all sorts of boundaries between your on time, your off time, around toxic people and not letting them be that close to you, you know, things that make it work for you, and try to do it without guilt. I think unwarranted guilt, which one of my doctoral students is studying, is a big problem. You know, we put a lot of guilt on ourselves that we don't need to put on. What do you think, Jane?
Yeah, I also think learning to say no is really important. You know, I think reviewing, you know, Sue and I were each lucky we got put on the AMJ. We became associate editors of AMJ pretty young in our career, because Jan Beyer knew us, and I think was, I know when I was doing that, I said no to all reviewing for all other journal. I mean, the reviewing thing can just sink you. And there's not I think it helps to some degree. I think you need some to have some reviewing, but really putting limits on the number of manuscripts that you review per month or per year. And if you're reviewing and you're not being put on an editorial board, it can be just this sunk. So learning to say no around reviewing, learning to say no around helping others, I feel like is important. Like, no, like I was really lucky when I was a junior person. One of the things that really helped is I formed this little micro community. It's Kathy Eisenhart, Bob Sutton, and myself, and we would do rapid reviewing of each other's papers. Like someone would send, and we'd be 48 hours, we'd be back. But I wasn't reviewing like 10 zillion people's and giving 10 zillion people's. And so learning to say no, even in your, and still preserve the sense that you're a good person. Saying no around the teaching, being a good enough teacher in the beginning is fine. Again, maybe you have more pressure than we did initially, but again, like I said, in the strategy field, I mean, I had to learn, took me a couple of years to even get acceptable. Well, I don't know. Anyway, learning to say no, I feel like is really, really important, and what you're good at, what you're not. I mean, I do a little exec ed now, but I always felt guilty about it, but I never did exec ed. Doctoral students were my priority. So learning what you are good at and what you love, what gives you life, what gives you energy, and try to say no to as much other stuff as you can.
I put it only takes a minute to say no. It takes a lot more minutes to do the thing. So
Yeah.
I say no often. And I'll just mention one other thing, and then we probably should turn to questions. A coach I was working with pointed this out to me. I'd be sitting in my office working on something, and I'm totally worried about my kids. And I'm worried about my youngest, and does she have friends on the playground, or is she all by herself today, and blah, 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 blah. And the coach pointed out, Sue, I think this worry about your kids while you're at work is just a high-minded form of procrastination. This is the most useful comment I ever got, because my worrying about my kids while I'm sitting in my office did nothing to help my child, right? And, I did kind of notice it was when I was working on projects that caused me the most anxiety, I would be the most worried about them. So, I do think some healthy degree of compartmentalizing can be helpful. And that comment really helped me a lot, saved me a lot. So are there questions, Nitya, or yeah?
Yeah, we have one, and I think it kind of dives very well into what we're talking about right now. Carolina asked, what advice do you have for junior scholars who want to prioritize self-care while pursuing a career in academia? What practices do you recommend?
Did you hear the part about how we both had infertility issues? We may not be the best self-care early in our careers examples. We were pretty much maniac in how we went about things early. But later, I think I didn't take a weekend until my daughter was 9 months old. We just brought her to the office on the weekends. Jim was here, I was here, and there was an office in between. We thought, God, if we could make that a daycare, that'd be great. And then we sort of said, we can't raise a child this way. Children need weekends. Turns out weekends are really fun. And you ought to take one more often than not.
Well, I took them from the beginning. So yeah. I couldn't do, because I had children from the beginning. I mean, so the thing is, I don't think I was more productive when I had more time.
No.
So it was really about using the time. I mean, I was not particularly social when I was working. I mean, I didn't go out for lunch with people. It was like, but the maniacal was in a fixed period of time. So sorry, I think I interrupted you, Sue. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. But I think the self-care thing, Jane's done stuff around meditation and retreats on that. For me, if I think about it, it's exercise. Making sure you're religious about keeping exercise on your calendar. I've come home totally stressed out. I go down basement, do my exercise routine. I feel like a different human.
Yeah. I was going to say also, like, we were really good at vacations. all the way through. Even when I was doctoral student, it was really important to get, I mean, I really can't, it's hard for me to come down from it, even in 2 days. Give me a week, and even better, give me 2 weeks, and it's pretty amazing as and the research supports this, the career will eat you up. I mean, that's my thing. I love this career, but it asks for an infinite number of things. And I hate to say it, maybe it's changed, but at the time that I was in it, I think the demands on women relationally was intense. I mean, it's not that there weren't men who were, but on average, because so many of the men, most of the men had stay-at-home partners at home, the women were managing a lot of stuff in addition. And then relationally, often, what Peter Frost would have called the toxin handlers in the system, where people, the doctoral students, the other faculty were coming to them for emotional support. And then I'll just add, and this is something for women as you get tenured and get promoted, the asks in terms of tenure letters, the frequency of asks of letters of evaluation is much higher for women than men, partly because there's fewer of them. And so you have to be, and every review committee wants a certain proportion of, an underrepresented group. And so women are getting taxed tons, and those are hard to say no to. Those are a harder thing to say no to than reviewing. Yeah.
Are there other questions?
I have one I'd like to throw out to you. Doctoral students. So you've talked a lot about kind of finding that meaning really early in your career. If you're mentoring a doc student that has kind of this meaning and they want to do it in their research, to me, it seems riskier. And so I'm wondering, how can I help my doc students kind of find that meaning, but still get to the ultimate job of getting a job, if that makes sense?
I mean, I feel like maybe the assessment of what's risky might be a little bit off, or possibly off. I mean, I think it's much riskier because your dissertation often defines the direction and what people know you as. If you go away from you go to something that will be marketable in the field and will get you a job, but it's disconnected from what you really care about, I feel like that can put you on a trajectory, kind of like the trajectory I was on, where it was so disconnected from who I was that 7 years out, I'm like, I'm out of here. I just can't, I'm not doing work that matters to me at all. And it was partly because there is this path dependence. So I feel as a faculty member, the best thing I could do was really listen to the students, and help them do the translation between those things that they really care about, and how they're going to locate that in the neighborhood of the field. And so I don't know that. So that would be what I would say. Sometimes, again, that's part of the worry that I get when I listen to our doctoral students now. They're sorting stuff based on potential impact in the field. And I feel like every idea is worthy. It's partly how do you connect it to the conversations in the field, et cetera. And that's what I think a faculty advisor should be doing, is helping in that translation connection process.
Yeah, I put it this way. I've rarely met a problem that someone feels emotionally and spiritually invested in that doesn't show up in organizations, because the people who are emotionally and spiritually invested in are humans, and in organizations, there are humans. And so these things translate. And so it's really just the job of articulating that importance and that connection. But I would not shy away from them. I think there's a danger in being totally instrumental, like Jane.
Yeah, Amy, I'll also say that I felt like, just like I felt like I never figured out being a working mother, I feel like I never figured out being a doctoral advisor. I felt like I was messing up so much, and just like, what am I doing? I don't know how to help this person. And what I would say, based on a lot of years of doing that, again, where I'm proudest of that, is that believing in them and their capacity when they didn't believe in themselves was the most important thing I did. And so trusting, and if you keeping that alive, that love for them and admiration for them alive, even though they're not doing what you want to do, and you don't know if you're hurting or helping. And I mean, there's just so many messages you can give yourself to doubt, that you're making a positive difference. But yeah, so anyway, I'm really passionate about this doctoral student stuff.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, Jane and I have both struggled with, we don't know what we're doing, here, like how to help this person. Like someone has trouble thinking. I don't know. I don't know how I think. It's not linear. So I can tell you that, but it's really, these things are really tough, and you got to get in the trenches with them and in the soup, trying to figure it out, and out of your comfort zone of, being the expert. Anything else?
I think we have time for one more question if anyone wants to unmute and ask or put it in the chat really quickly.
I have a question. So it sounds, like a lot of what you're saying is integrating. I'm thinking about boundary management theory, of kind of integrating your work and family life. And what about for people who prefer to segment? Is there a path forward there as well? Or is finding meaning really about the integration of the two?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think the segmenters are the traditional path. That has been the path that, we keep those two segmented. We think analytically about the field and what study needs to be the seventh study after we read the 6 studies. It's just the 2 people that were invited to speak today, like, that's not our jam. That's not what we do. But I do think that, yeah, of course, that would be good. And it would work. And if it works for you, it's fine. I told you about guilt. Don't feel guilty about it. That's good. It's really finding what works for you.
Yeah, my husband is more of a segmenter than I am, and I've seen him be really, successful and happy keeping it segmented. So I do think that there's multiple ways. Again, I think sharing your story so we need a diversity of stories.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like that. Like Jean Bartunik, Connie Gersick, and I wrote an AMJ paper on the experience of men and women in academia, which was actually, again, it was a me search. It was all about business schools and faculty. And it came from the 3 of us listening to 6 segmenters on a panel at the Academy. They happened to be all men, and the 3 of us were going like, whoa, this is so different than our lived experience. And so we got to study this. So I feel like whether it's all integrators or all segmenters, either one of those, homogeneity is a problem. I think what we really need is to have a real diversity of stories that talk about the pain of it and the suffering in trying to do this, as well as the joys and the possibilities that
Jane, we have a good question about routines, rituals, or practices that have really served you in enjoying the profession and warding off burnout. So I definitely have. And one of them I shared in the talk that Nietzsche was talking about from this summer, but it was a guy Jane and I met really early in our doctoral program. He was a visiting scholar, Walt Nord. And one night we were there late with him, and we were asking him, what is he working on? And he's like, well, there are fertile times in our field, in your career, and fallow times. And what I've learned is to not get totally freaked out in the fallow times, but rather to use those to sort of feed and rejuvenate myself, like read more broadly than I would have read, for example, but that metaphor really helped me, you know, when I'm in a fallow time, to know that that's what he said is, and the other thing I learned is when I'm in a fallow time, a fertile time will come. And so that confidence that it's going to come. And then the thing I would add later in my career is when you're in a fertile time, just really enjoy it. I mean, those things are a blessing. So any you think of, Jane, routines help you with burnout?
Well, I think paying attention to toxicity is really important. That, I mean, there's been a couple of collaborations, for example, that I backed out of at the time when, you know, you'd sort of say, oh man, I'm really in deep, I can't back out. But because the process is so deadening, and again, at least my experience is papers take a really long time to do. And if you are connected to someone or a process that is toxic, you know, it really can affect your ability to, you know, have it's very hard to replenish if you're in a toxic department, if you're in a toxic collaboration. And, you know, it wasn't until really late for me, the CPO thing, with the exception of Sue, CPO thing that I didn't ever collaborate with people at Michigan. I mean, I had collaborations with my doctoral students and with people outside of Michigan. I felt like as a qualitative researcher, I did not fit here. And so really paying attention to you know, what is life-giving to you, and go to those kinds of rituals. I'll just, one really simple thing I did is I never presented, I always use the academy as a deadline for a whole written paper. You know, you can get, or talk, every time I gave a talk to another place, I would use it as an opportunity to create, my words were always, create a product. Because you can go to infinite number of conferences that don't leave you with any products. And so, you know, again, making sure that, I think a routine I had was, this is not replenishment, but it is replenishment in the sense of it. I think it fed me in that I felt that I was being quote unquote productive, but it was partly by just limiting the number of conferences I went to, and always trying to push myself to write something about when I was giving talks or using the academy as a deadline.
I guess the final thing I'd say is find the right mix of activities that works for you. I mean, for me, it turned out running things was easier than teaching. So, you know, I did a 4-year tour in a dean role. That was too full-time, but then I've run our EMBA, I've run our department, I've run our leadership initiative, and that worked for me. Might not work for you, but there's a mix that will be enlivening maximally.
And so, what do you do?
I think you have to bring us home. I got a 12 o'clock faculty meeting. Got to get to.
I hope this was helpful. I don't know.
Oh, I'm going to go ahead and speak for everybody here, which is a lot of people, and I apologize for doing that, but it was so helpful and meaningful and inspiring, and we're so grateful for you both taking time out of your very, very busy days to share some of your.
I'm not busy, so anybody who wants to have a Zoom conversation, or if you were local, go for a walk, I would love to. So that's an invitation.
She's not busy, but she has a schedule, and I'm telling you, you got to get on it. So. All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope this was useful. Great to see the faces.
Thank you for asking us. Bye.
Bye.